Here's a timeline of U.S.-Iran relations since 1953. 1953. U.S.-backed coup and reinstallation of the Shah. Tensions initially began brewing over the democratically elected Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh's efforts to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, now BP. The British colonial power controlled the majority stake in the joint venture company, since oil was discovered in the early 1900s. Mossadegh's moves to nationalize the company after his 1951 election angered the British. The U.S.'s Central Intelligence Agency supported the United Kingdom in engineering a coup and backing once-deposed monarch Pahlavi back into power as Shah. 1957. Atoms for peace. The Shah's ambitions for a nuclear-powered Iran gained support from the U.S. and other Western allies. Both countries signed a nuclear agreement for the civilian use of nuclear power as part of then U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. A decade later, the U.S. provided Iran with a nuclear reactor and uranium to fuel it. The nuclear collaboration forms the basis for the current nuclear question. 1979. Islamic Revolution. While relations between Tehran and Washington flourished, Iranians groaned under the dictatorship of the Shah and resisted the perceived overreach of Western influence on their business. Revolutionary protests began rocking the country in late 1978 and forced the Shah to flee in January 1979. Exiled Islamic scholar Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to rule the new Islamic Republic. 1980. U.S. cuts diplomatic ties. Following the U.S.'s move to admit the Shah for cancer treatment after his exile, Iranian students broke into the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and kidnapped 52 Americans for 444 days. Washington cut off diplomatic ties and imposed sanctions on the country. The Shah died in exile. 1980 to 88. U.S. backs. Iraqi invasion. Following Iraq's invasion of Iran under Saddam Hussein, who was eager to push back against Khomeini's ideology, the U.S. sided with Iraq, deepening tensions between the two nations. The war lasted till 1988 and saw thousands die on both sides. Iraq also used chemical weapons on Iran. 1984. Sponsor of terror designation. President Ronald Reagan officially designated Iran as a state sponsor of terror after a series of attacks in Lebanon, where the U.S. had been drawn in after Israel invaded the country. In one attack on a military base in Beirut, 241 U.S. service members were killed. The U.S. blamed Hezbollah, a Lebanese Shia movement backed by Iran. Later, though, Reagan worked with Iran behind the scenes to free American hostages held by Hezbollah. When it came to light, the Iran-Contra affair, as it was termed, was a huge scandal for Reagan. 1988. Iran air flight shot down. Amid war tensions and even direct attacks on each other's military warships in the Gulf, a U.S. naval ship breached Iranian waters and fired at the civilian Iran air flight, IR-655, headed to Dubai on July 8th. All 290 people on board were killed. The U.S., which claimed it was a mistake, did not formally apologize or claim responsibility, but paid families $61.8 million as compensation. 1995. Tighter sanctions. Between 1995 and 1996, the U.S. imposed more sanctions. Then, President Bill Clinton's executive orders banned U.S. companies from dealing with Iran, while Congress passed a law penalizing foreign entities investing in the country's energy sector or selling Iran advanced weapons. The U.S. cited nuclear advancement and support of groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. 2002. 9/11 aftermath. Following the 9/11 attacks on the U.S., President George W. Bush, in a State of the Union address, said Iran was part of an axis of evil alongside Iraq and North Korea. At the time, Iran had been parlaying with the U.S. behind the scenes to target their mutual foes, the Taliban in Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda. The cooperation was soured, and by the end of 2022, international observers noted highly enriched uranium in Iran, inviting more sanctions. 2013. Iran nuclear deal. Between 2013 and 2015, U.S. President Barack Obama began high-level talks with Iran. In 2015, Tehran agreed to the nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, that would limit Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for an easing of sanctions. China, Russia, France, Germany, the UK, and the European Union were also party to the deal that capped Iran's enrichment at 3.67%.
2018. Trump withdraws from the nuclear deal. Under Trump's first term, the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the deal in 2018 and slapped back sanctions against Iran. Trump and Israel had been critical of the deal. Iran also called off its commitments and began producing enriched uranium beyond the limits the deal had imposed. 2020. IRGC leader assassinated. During Trump's first term, the U.S. killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the elite Quds Force of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, in Baghdad in a drone strike. A year earlier, the administration had named the Quds Force a terrorist organization. Iran responded with strikes on U.S. assets in Iraq. 2025. Letter to Tehran. In March, Trump shot off a letter to Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, proposing new negotiations on a nuclear deal with a deadline of 60 days. But Khamenei rejected the offer, saying the U.S. is not seeking negotiations with Iran, but rather imposing demands on it. Talks started unofficially in Oman and Italy, with Muscat acting as the mediator. Trump claimed his team was very close to a deal after several rounds of talks and warned Israel against strikes. Tehran, too, expressed optimism but insisted on the right to enrich uranium, a sticking point in the talks. Israel launched strikes across Iran a day before the sixth round of the Iran-US talks. 2025. U.S. strikes. The U.S. bombed 3 key nuclear facilities in Iran, citing security concerns and the defense of Israel.